Well, the Big 12's conference realignment strategy has been copied by an old friend. Welcome into the YouTube channel. I am John Kurtz. Been a while since I feel like I've talked to you in this format, and this is in a totally new location. For me, it may look basically the same to you, but it's taken some work to get there. So thank you for bearing with me through a transition period here in my life. But if you're new to the channel, I talk college football every day on this channel, particularly Big 12 football and conference realignment. Please consider subscribing if you have not subscribed to the channel already. We have some conference realignment loose ends basically to tie up with a lot happening here. The trickle-down effect from Texas and Oklahoma all the way down to Conference USA and the potential death there of CUSA. But first, we get to our old friend, Mike Oresco. And by our old friend, I mean Big 12 fans have not been particularly fond of Oresco since back in the summer. It looked like the AAC and Oresco were going to try to raid the Big 12, and he was certainly beating that drum pretty hard. Now, Oresco did make the move to add 6 members to his conference. The AAC announced that last week. It's accepted applications from Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. There was no official date as to when these teams would start in the league, but the reports are that it will be 2023 as the target year. So that should stand out right away, I think, to Big 12 fans, as, again, another piece of evidence pointing us all toward 2023 being that real inflection point where I would tell you it's likely Texas and Oklahoma do find a way to leave by then. I think it's very likely that the other schools from the AAC find a way to get in: Houston, UCF, Cincinnati. And I think that's what we're seeing here. It's just further proof that 2023, even the AAC is thinking internally like, okay, these guys are going to find a way to be out by then, right? That's the logical conclusion here. BYU, we know, will be fine. They can come in 2023. And then the AAC is talking about getting its new schools in 2023. So I think we'll see a ton of movement right around then. We've done videos here on Texas and Oklahoma, how it won't be cheap for that to happen. You can go watch that from last week. Max Olson had some really good insight from that, someone who covers the Big 12 like basically nobody else from The Athletic. But I still think they find a way to get it done just because of all the logistics happening right now. So the addition of these 6 schools, according to this Yahoo Sports article, will create a 14-team league for football and men's basketball. You've got East Carolina, Memphis, Navy, South Florida, SMU, Temple, Tulane, Tulsa, and Wichita State. And how about this from the release of the AAC? The AAC's wording here is they hope to add members from fertile recruiting areas such as Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Lauderdale, Charlotte, and Birmingham. Now that should sound familiar to you because that sounds exactly like the same pitch and push that Bob Bowlesby, Big 12 commissioner, was trying to give when he added the 3 AAC schools. I don't think Provo, Utah is necessarily included in that, but BYU was a big established brand already there. The other 3, it was about adding schools with potential and particularly recruiting potential, fertile recruiting ground that you want to get into. There are hardly any better places to be than Florida, Ohio, and Texas, and particularly some of the areas there. I mean, Cincinnati, great big metro area. Orlando, big metro area. Houston, big metro area. So on a smaller scale, on a smaller level, the AAC copied the Big 12's plan and strategy here, which is smart because there were not any big name brands, home runs out there for the AAC on their level to go get. They tried, amicably so, they tried to go get Boise State and San Diego State. I guess admirably so is what I should say there. I admire the gusto to try and go get them, but that was never going to make any sense for those schools. So it's not surprising that it did not work out. But in lieu of that, now your next step is go get the best potential candidates out there. And I go back to the NFL draft analogy that I've used, a recruiting analogy. You could also say that it's that. You just go take the schools that have the most potential, the best athlete available, and hope you bring them into your program. You nurture them. In this case, you can give them a little bit more money and resource and prestige than what they had, and they will turn into something. That's the whole idea here. The Big 12 had to do it with 3 of 4. They had one big value brand there sitting in BYU. That was the one that TV execs said would actually add to the Big 12's TV contract. Then everything else, you're basing it on potential. So same strategy here for the AAC. And on the subject of Mike Oresco, I give him a ton of credit for this aspect of the story. Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports said the new members are expected to earn $2 million annually from the AAC's TV deal, with the remaining members continuing to average approximately $7 million annually. So keeping the remaining members at $7 million annually after the exit of the 3 most high-profile schools, in essence, in the conference is huge. That is massive and something I didn't think would happen. A lot of the reporting early on was that, hey, if Cincy, UCF, and Houston all leave the conference, it is in the conference language that ESPN all of a sudden is in a position where that contract could no longer be applicable. Like they could get out of it at that point and not have to pay what they had been paying. So whatever it was that Oresco had to do to make that happen, he deserves a lot of credit for continuing to pay out $7 million for those members. Now, $2 million for these new schools may not sound like a ton, but you take a school like Rice, for example, that is going to get a $500,000 payout in Conference USA this year. Bam, you take that times 4, that is some new money for Rice. Like, that's 4 times the resources that they were getting from their conference. So on a smaller scale, I know $2 million doesn't sound like much to the big schools in the Big 12, but that is on the level for Rice, something that can be very significant. And that's what we're talking about, taking these baby steps of growth to get to the point where they can be the programs that the AAC really envisions and wants them to be. The article does make note of the fact that, again, the Mountain West, they swung and missed. The AAC did, not just Boise and San Diego State, but also Air Force and Colorado State. And even though Air Force and Colorado State are not really in line for potential Big 12 invites, it still always made sense to me for them to stay. Regional rivalries, not much more money, not much more prestige. It just seemed like it would be reshuffling the deck for the sake of reshuffling the deck and then paying more in travel costs. I never really understood all of that. The AAC is going to need some more firepower. Make no mistake, this is about playing for the future and down the road, which is really the only play that they had left at this point. But just to kind of underscore this whole point, some computer numbers from our friend Jeffrey Fuller, who puts together the composite computer rankings of all the different computer rankings in college football. So the new AAC is at an average team ranking of 88 right now. Doesn't sound great, right? Yeah, it's below the Sun Belt, which is at 85, well behind the Mountain West, which is at 71. And that used to be the primary competition for the AAC, obviously the Mountain West. The AAC is also just barely above the MAC, which is at 90. So we're talking about 88 and 90. I mean, not much of a difference right now between those two conferences. And that's something that will hurt and sting for the AAC, but it is the reality right now. So they are hoping that 5 years from now, those numbers start to look a lot differently. And hey, if you are an AAC fan, you could be in a worse spot. You could be the Sun Belt or Conference USA, particularly Conference USA, which stands to be, you know, when you saw the graphics that were put out of like the big fish eating the smaller fish, eating the smaller fish, eating the smaller fish. And it was like the SEC, the Big 12, the AAC. The end of the line and the last fish to be eaten there might be Conference USA, because they lost over half of their teams in the span of a week between UAB, Florida Atlantic, UNC Charlotte, North Texas, Southern Miss, Rice, and UTSA. That is a tough blow. And right now, the word is for Pete Thamel of Yahoo, Conference USA is actively pursuing multiple avenues to expand and stay afloat. Schools they've engaged with are Sam Houston State, New Mexico State, and Tarleton State. That's an effort, in Thamel's words, to fortify the western flank of CUSA that got gutted by the AAC. And man, I don't know. I'm sorry. Just when you get to the point where we're talking about Tarleton State, I feel for Conference USA and where they are at. I hope that they stay alive and continue to, I don't know if thrive is the right word, but at least just survive and move on, because I do hate in conference realignment all the changes and what it can do to different leagues and affect the lives of so many people. And we're definitely seeing that there with CUSA. Now, I mentioned Southern Miss being gone. Southern Miss has gone to the Sun Belt, which may be officially announced by the time that you watch this video. It hadn't as of Tuesday morning when I recorded this, but it reportedly was going to happen later that day. The Sun Belt also has looked at adding Marshall, ODU, and James Madison. Liberty and James Madison are two schools that have also been kind of linked with Conference USA potentially as well. I would think if there's any competition there, James Madison would be much more intrigued by the Sun Belt than it would CUSA based on where those two leagues are at this point. So that's all the trickle down, man. Starting back with that report in July out of the Houston Chronicle about Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, it could result all the way down the line in the death of CUSA. Rest in peace, CUSA, if that does happen. Don't want to see it. Here on this channel, I talk college football every day, particularly Big 12 football and conference realignment. Please subscribe if you have not. Would appreciate your consideration in doing that. You can also follow me on Twitter at JLKurtz. I've got live chats coming throughout the week that are a lot of fun. So bear with me as I get my new setup figured up here, but I think we should be ready to rock and roll from here on out. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I will talk to you soon.